grow it. From the Stash Podcast.
This episode is brought to you by Canna's new commercial products. You got to check out Canna's new Cocoa High Concentrate and Cocoa Flex Cubes. Canna's Cocoa High Concentrate formulas and Cocoa Flex Substrate Cubes are designed to optimize space, reduce costs, streamline labor, and enhance plant performance. Their new Cocoa High Concentrate A and B formula is double the concentration of their beloved fertilizers, ensuring optimal veg and bloom in a simple 2-part base. Flex Cubes are high-quality cocoa pith in recyclable plastic grow bags, offering consistent dry backs and pre-drilled irrigation hose. Say goodbye to the inconsistent dry backs and microplastics and look into Canna's new commercial products. Find out more at cannagardening.com/commercial or reach out to the Grow World platform. AC Infinity, leaders in garden innovation. From tents to controllers, AC Infinity can take your garden to the next level. The inline fans lead the pack with the ability to control all aspects of the equipment, along with the clip-on oscillating fan that changed the game, which all can be controlled with the Controller 69. Whether you're looking for individual pieces for your current grow, or you're trying to set up something completely new with one of their grow kits, AC Infinity has you covered from top to bottom. Use discount code TheStash15 at checkout to save some money on your order. From the Stash Podcast, we are back, boys. Not together, really, but kind of together spiritually.
We're here together.
Metaphorically, emotionally. But in person, no, not this time.
Virtually.
But we need to talk. We need to talk, man. We had some things that were very important. And mainly it was, how you doing? Yeah, you guys are. You guys know how you're doing.
I'm doing good.
Yeah, Chris is like,
sorry, I got sidetracked. I had to pick up my phone. I got a text. I wasn't sure if it was an emergency.
Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. He's like, I'm fine.
I'm fine.
Nothing's wrong.
We need to restart.
No, it's perfect. It's perfect. So, dudes, we've been growing for a long time. We've changed things up, and I feel like with the introduction to the variety of things like autoflowers, God forbid triploids, fast flowering cultivars, the methods of training do change depending on the stage. And if you're somebody who, let's say, has a limited amount of veg time based on doing something like autos or fast flowering, so you want to flip real quick based on, let's say, if you're outdoor growing, when you do these specific training methods from seed to harvest do vary. And I think what you do also varies. Now, between the three of us, we've kind of figured out that we do have a comparable approach to a lot of things, but I think it'd be good to talk about the variables through these different stages and what you recommend and when you'd recommend it.
Yeah, I think training's very important. It's kind of one of the things that I champion a lot. I think if you're going to be taking advantage of this plant, taking advantage of the opportunity to grow your own medication, I think you should grow as much as you can with as few plants as possible. And particularly in places where I'm at in Canada, we have limits. You can only grow 4 plants. Therefore, you kind of need to be able to use the plant to your advantage to get the most out of your opportunity and or a situation. And so when it comes to training, I personally believe training starts in choosing quality genetics. You're going to want a genetic that's going to be hardy to stress, whether it's going to be temperature, depending on the training that you're going to be doing, or whether it's going to be the intensity of the training that you're going to put onto the plant. You're going to want genetics that are going to be able to handle that, not something that's going to be finicky and something that's going to be, not enjoying the stress you're putting on it.
And there are so many different ways to go about it. I mean, geez, depending on the plant growth, usually is kind of how I adjust my training, right? If I got a short squat plant, it's going to be treated differently than I have a long stretchier plant with like longer internodes, for example. So yeah, I mean, starting from the beginning, seedling stage, is anybody doing training during the seedling stage at all? And like, I know a common thing to do is people do that initial bend pretty early. Within the first 10 days, they're doing just a bend of that main stem, right? Are you guys doing that at all or no?
I feel like only if it was a situation where I let that seedling get too lanky and I didn't keep it close enough to the light, didn't have any airflow in there, not as much. It happens, not as often, but if it gets too lanky, then I would do some training. Immediately I'm tying it down. Otherwise, I'm going to let it grow a little bit, probably to the point where we've got at least 2 sets of leaf stacking before I get there, till at least maybe 2 to 3 nodes at the minimum in my experience. But again, I've had lanky seedlings that just from the temperature, a variety of different reasons just are lankier. And from there you can do, I saw OG Lieutenant Blazer, he called it loop technique, where essentially you just retuck that lanky stem into the soil and let it just regrow back up there, which works. Obviously I tried it works. But then also you just tie it down. I've done that before with little plant training things like Bud Trainer has, and just hook them to there, flip it down, we're Gucci.
Yeah, those long stretchy ones, people either pin them down or use more soil to kind of bury up that stem. It's actually called the hypocotyl. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Hypocotyl. It should be, that first stem, it should be about 1.5 to 2 inches, but they start to stretch and become 2, 3+ inches and kind of flop over. So bringing it back up and have some sort of support, whether it be using more soil, or some people use like a toothpick or a small little stick and kind of tie it up to keep it upright. So I typically don't have to really do that. I'll do the burying it up a little bit to kind of make sure the thing's not flopping over when I do get the stretchy ones. But I'm not really doing that bend and pinning it down to the soil like some people do. Good technique. I mean, people still do it and they get some good results off of it, but I don't find myself doing that at all, really.
I think too, I can't really add a whole lot in regards to training that you guys haven't already said. I agree with third node. I think it's safe. When we tell people that who are going to be training their plants to start at the third node, I think you can get earlier, but you should be a little more experienced in understanding when the stunting is going to take effect and when she'll just die because she's the most fragile. However, I also think training can start before the plant comes out of the dirt, right? If some people that train, at least I know I have in the past, slide the bean over towards the side of the pot before as they plant it. So to say it in English so most people can understand, they plant the seed on the side of the pot rather than in the middle of it, so that as it grows up, you can train it down and then have it trained over the pot rather than over the side of the pot, maintaining more space and not so much hanging over the side of the pot. So something to think about as well.
And I think that's especially for photos. So like if you're dealing with autos, you could potentially risk starting too early with your flowering, because if those roots are going to be hitting the side and growing around the side there, I have seen, depending on the cultivar, where it starts flowering where you're like, why the hell do I have a plant that's growing this big and I've got flowering on it? Like it can't happen. But that's a great quick tip to do that. I never thought about to focus on the growth on the side to work it to the middle like that.
Well, you should stop growing autos if you are, according to Pigeons. He released a video on that. It says stop growing auto flowers.
I wasn't going to say it.
Yeah.
You guys have to dig back up and watch that video. It's very informative.
Yeah, I'll let you know. I think that's where, if you're dealing then with autos in the same point and they're growing like that, would you treat it the same way? Would you wait to that node to do some training, or would you, and this is bending in particular, or would you let it get taller? You treat it any different?
I'm usually bending it at the third, fourth node is when I'm doing that first bend. At that point is really when, like Pigeons had said, most of the training kind of starts, whether it be a bend at that point or a topping at that point. Now with autoflowers, I've topped them in the past. Every single time I top them, I probably topped them maybe close to it half a dozen times, if not a half a dozen times. So not too many, but a handful. And every time the result just wasn't as good as non-topped plants. So I don't like to top autos anymore. I just do the bending down. And yeah, usually for autos, I'll do it at the third or fourth node. I'll do that bend and allow those side branches to kind of catch up and try to create that even canopy.
Make a little mustard. I like it.
Yep. Yeah. I would train an auto exactly as I would train a photo. Sorry, I totally missed that.
Catch up. Went over my head too.
Boom. It's okay. It's okay. I got bars sometimes. I think that's where people overthink autos and photos in that sense. But when you come into the training methods, not the time, but the methods, that's going to be the biggest thing, is because topping, you have a limited window for healing your plant. Essentially, if you have an autoflower, you have a limited window for vegging. A photo period, you can top and then top and then top and get crazy with it. You can also do your bending and then top down the road, or top and then bend. So the strategies of when are going to vary when it comes to high stress techniques. And that would be one of those, is topping or fimming the plant, would be massively focused for me primarily on photos only. So as you're getting to the point now where, let's say, you're in clone size or you're vegging, defoliation, is this something that you guys start doing earlier on, or are you waiting until the plant is going into flower? When do you hit that, if you're doing any tucking or if you're doing any pinching, let's say?
For me, it depends on genetics. You know, like I mentioned in the beginning, it depends on growth. If I have a short, squatty one, I might need to take off more leaves. You know, shorter internodes, there's more leafier structure, for example. I might need to defoliate, take some stuff off in order to get that airflow going through. Now, the longer, stretchier ones, there's times when I'm going into flower and I'm not doing any defoliation at all because there's enough room around, airflow is not inhibited, things like that. And so I'm really honestly trying to push the defoliation of plucking off leaves, push that as far as I can. And usually when I do it is right before flipping the flower. I'll do it. I'll do a nice strip, then flip to flower either that day or a couple days later, flip to flower, and then kind of go from there. So I do try to push off defoliation as much as possible. Now, lollipopping, which is kind of similar, right? You know, in a sense to where you're pulling things off, it's kind of like a pruning technique, but you're just removing the growth in the lower third, and you're also removing some of those branches that kind of aren't reaching up to the top. That I feel like I'm doing, you know, roughly around week 4 is the earliest I'll do the lollipopping, kind of strip that lower down. So yeah, that's for defoliation and lollipopping and veg in particular. That's kind of what I do.
Yeah, and if these terms are confusing to you listening or watching, we've got videos and episodes that cover specifically defoliation and other training techniques more in depth on what those specific techniques are. Defol, Pete, I've noticed that your last couple plants have been globes and bushes. Did you structure those that way? I know you do a lot of training, but did you structure those more that way? Because I know sometimes when you first get the plant, you don't.
Yeah, the Chillot OGs that I did, I just let them grow.
And they globed out like that?
And they kind of just, they kind of did this like little weird thing where they were kind of like trying to express themselves a bit. But I didn't touch them at all. And I think it's like just the way my environment is, to be honest. You know, when I say I don't touch them though, it's like, of course, you know, it's that line of, well, how much is too much? And then at what point do I call some defol a defol and not just like a little bit of take the little things off, right? I think there's a huge difference, in my opinion.
He's got a little Bill Clinton there.
In my opinion, I did not have sexual relations. Prune that woman. I'm thinking like a defol is strip. Like you're removing a large amount of foliage from the plant. Something like a prune or something like a cleaning or a routine maintenance, I don't consider a defol. So I all the insignificant growth, the little leaves, the little branches, those all go. Those are all gone. But when I take those off throughout the days of the week, I don't consider that a defol. So maybe the entire process may be considered a defol. When I did the Chillot OGs, when I say I didn't touch them, I still removed, more of a lollipop per se. I still removed a lot of that bottom weak growth that I don't want to have to deal with in trim time, and I don't want to have to deal with in dry time. That's all nonsense to me. So, and I'm not using it for concentrate in the way that I used to. So removing that lower third of the plant is kind of a natural process to me that I don't consider defol. Or really training.
I think that just goes that goes with your shaping of the plants, Right. But it's like I guess it varies because you are the most diverse genetic grower I've ever met in terms of like most everybody I know is the same forever. You know what I'm saying? Like the same clones. It's like you've been growing that for 12 years, or like randomly they just still have this random genetic. I mean, look at Chris. He's perfected the ones we've smoked them since we've met him. Like the Prism Labs and the THC Titan stuff. Like it's awesome. I love that. But you've gone through and tried so many different things. So when you go to this cleanup portion of your training, do you do this when it's like clone size or a little baby? Or are you letting it get big into veg before you start taking the weak stuff off?
I'm pretty diverse. You know this. You know, the thing is like I'm on a hunt, baby. It's like you asked me a lot. You're like, oh, you kept that, right?
Yeah, I'm always like excited when you do, and then you're like,
nope, gone with the wind, baby.
You're like, man, I loved this smoke. It was so good.
I do that a lot. This was so good. So you kept it?
Yeah.
No.
No. Every single time, I swear to God. He's like, no, I didn't. No.
Yeah. You
Like,
guys
man,
be
chill out.
people get frustrated the more they
color.
listen to me. You know,
Oh,
they're
you
like, wow.
You had a beautiful chill out OG, and I'm like, did you clone that?
No.
Like, no.
Dude,
Did
that
you
would have
take
been a breeding
pictures?
chill out OG.
Yep, you got pictures. Though.
We got lots of pictures. Yeah. But yeah, you didn't want it though. You wouldn't have liked it.
No, it was super funky and dank and pretty as hell.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have wanted this shit, man. I'm telling you.
It would have stunk up the whole house, Chris. Don't worry.
You would have got so high.
Did you?
And
You would have got too high, Chris. I'm telling you.
Yeah, you would have wanted to eat and be smiling. Like, you wouldn't want
You would have
this,
talked
man.
too much. You would have talked. To answer your question, the training never stops. I guess it's like it really. You'll do a minor lollipop at the beginning of week, say 3, 4, and then that doesn't stop. That little minuscule growth and those little branches, they're persistent, man. They keep popping up. Plant keeps getting taller. The lower just keeps getting weaker. So it's like you're constantly just removing stuff throughout the entire process. For me, I mean, just keep on tucking, baby. I just thought of that.
Damn, you should coin that.
Hey,
I'm gonna see if Troy would like to use that. We'll see if
I'm gonna give that to
Northern
Troy.
Sprague.
I'm gonna give that to Troy. That's good.
Well, P, I think the flock who is watching you right now might be kind of wondering, they've watched you for a while, right? So the flock is Pigeons' audience. That's what he calls his audience. And warp back to 2020, 2019, 2018. You were adamant about training very early and training every single branch. And this kind of translates over into like a super cropping is really what people call it, is really you're breaking that outer layer of the stem and letting that branch flop over. Mm-hmm. And we had a conversation on Garden Talk many years ago, and you were adamant that every single branch that came up, you were super cropping and letting it flop over and straightening those branches. Are you still doing that to this day or what?
It's the same day. To this day. I stand on my principles, Christopher. No, yeah. Unless, like Rob said, the thing is, it's like everything's new. Like Rob said, though, it's like if I'm trying,
no, sometimes it's new seeds, but not new genetics.
Yeah. I'll do the same. The thing is like the Chill Out OG. I really wanted an honest look at it in my environment. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't want to. You guys didn't tell me a crumb on my shirt.
I couldn't see because your shoulder's cut off right there.
It is. Don't worry. I know I got it.
It's a good shoulder. I might have crumbs over here. No, it's
little breadcrumbs.
It's
breadcrumbs over here.
It's actually hash browns.
I eat like this.
I had hash browns.
I check my shoulders now.
Brush your shoulders off real quick.
Brush your shoulders off. Can we just get some minor powder over here, please?
Powder.
I wanted an honest look at the Chill Out because I was growing it for my buddy Chris, right?
Scientific purposes.
It was for science, and I wanted to just see how it handled itself. The next time I grow it, it's going through the paces. Now I might even get but I could get an entirely different pheno. Might handle things different. Might express herself a little bit different. But that's the joy of growing this beautiful plant, and that's the joy I have in training it. Is I'm gonna control it. I'm going to determine how big it gets, and so on and so forth. So when it comes to answering your question, yeah, I still do train every single branch. That's the branch that's going to bear the fruit. So I want it to be strong. I want it to be independent. I want it to be, stable,
strong,
much like myself.
Yeah. Strong, independent woman.
Strong, independent woman.
I think it's a valid point, though, when you look at it, is you can't treat everything as a blanket statement that you're always going to do it. Probably at the time, these were more genetics that you were consistently growing. You had multiple of the same, as were in the past. I'd say post-Rona, and especially since we've been working with seedsmen, is trying a variety of different genetics, is making it so you do approach things a little differently. But your plants do often have the same shape. Even though you're not touching them, you say you clearly are. And I think that's what
I meant with this. Yeah.
It's almost
at what point does
memory.
it become touchy or no touchy?
we've done it so long as a grower that you just do this and you don't even think like, oh yeah, that's right, I just pulled it off because I saw that there. And obviously common sense says pull this little minuscule piece off that's not going to get any light. So for me, I do it immediately when it's really young because it's so easy to pull off. And so like it's just easy to take and pinch and it's gone. But you let it get further and sometimes you look at it and you're like, damn, I should keep that little piece there. You know, unless you're utilizing a screen of green or like major low stress training, those pieces aren't worth it. You can let them grow longer and then take those for clones potentially. But me personally, I think that taking those early when they're really young, anything that seems like a node that's not worth it, it's going to give more time for that plant to recover versus doing it and then flipping to flower in a couple weeks. So it's more something if I'm going to start stripping, you know what I'm saying, get the OF going, or if I'm going to start removing any leaves, I try to do it when it's in between that point of being too delicate that it's young and I could hurt the plant and stun it, into the point where I'm transitioning into full-on veg. And it's hardy enough and you could see that there's enough growth. It's malleable that I can still pinch and pull and it's fine. But at the same time, you could see it's gotten past that young pup phase, we'll say, you know?
That's a good point. I should probably do a better job at that, particularly when it comes to branches, right? Removing branches earlier than I do now. Because sometimes I'm removing, sometimes we're at like week 3 or something. There's that first node branch, for example, and it's not going to make it up to the top, right? But I'm thinking back at I usually just leave it until I do that stripping a week 4 or 5 or whatever before flipping to flower. And, maybe I'll take a page out of your book and kind of remove that a little bit earlier than I would. So that way it can recover and focus on the other growth.
Get hardier over there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's it, unless you're doing the screen and green technique. So if you're running Northern Scrogger style, Scrog Nation or Beast Coast, then some of that little stuff, if you start bending your plant immediately underneath those areas and let them get evened out, then it's worth keeping. So it's like your training technique, you got to know down the road what you're going to do versus just jumping in and saying, all right, well, we top here because this guy says it. We low stress chain here because he said, like, it needs to be thought out a little bit. I'd recommend knowing your future technique, knowing your flowering technique, knowing what your end goal is going to be. Because if you strip all this down and you have this long, lanky, leggy plant and you think you're going to do a scrog down the road, well, you have all these nodes and all these bud sites that don't exist. So you're just going to essentially stretch this plant out and have it naked on the inside.
You make a good point in regards to the tucking of the plant. You know how we wait weeks to, like, rule of thumb for me, it was a few days, like 3-4 days. I would do no training to kind of ease her as I switched the lights over to 12 and 12, which I do immediately. If anyone's wondering, just switch to 12 and 12. And then the next 3 weeks, I would take a little bit of time to train the plant. But you take 3 days off from tucking before you switch to 12 and 12. I feel like that's 3 days lost. For me, it's like when I tuck, and I'm far from an expert, I tuck it, put it down, switch the lights to 12 and 12.
Tuck that thing, flip it, and reverse it. Every time I think tuck it, I always think Buffalo Bob from Silence of the Lambs. Where he's like, would you? He's got it all tucked.
Oh, that's cute. That's cute. I'm glad that's what comes to mind. I'm glad you think of that when I'm That's cute. That's cute. So I feel like it's a little different. If you can't wait, you don't wait the 3 days. You don't tuck it, wait 3 days for those girls to come up, start see, he's having a thought of me right now, guys. So the raise up and they stretch, then you switch, you're hooped, right? Would you?
That's the thing too, is
through the tears, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, through the tears had a great point though, because if you're flipping there, that stretch of that plant is a factor too. Not every plant is going to have crazy stretching. My Chill Out OG didn't have a 300% increase like I saw with that freaking donuts, but it stretched a little bit. But I wasn't able to fill in the canopy like I thought I would have been because I anticipated way more of a stretch ignorantly. Because how squatty the plant was, I was like, it stretched, but it wasn't like I was thinking it was going to be ridiculous. Like, this is going to be triple in size. It doubled, which is good, but it didn't get lanky stretch. You know what I'm saying? It just got bigger. As where some plants, it's like they literally will stretch out. The nodes seem like they get further apart, depending on the cultivar, of course. But it makes you have to consider there's not always the surefire way to guarantee that you'll get the proper training technique unless you can give yourself enough of a window for veg time. So that way you have enough. If you're flipping immediately, it may not fill out your canopy like you want to, or it may not have enough time to recover to get the full budding that you'd like in those areas. And that could hinder your overall performance. So like when you train is very important.
Yeah, and it's going to depend so much, like I kind of mentioned quickly in the beginning, is the genetics, whether or not, how much they stretch. So kind of topping strategy for me, kind of getting into that a little bit, it really depends on growth. It's either the third, fourth, or fifth node. Once it reaches one of those nodes, I'm doing a topping. Okay, if I have a longer, stretchier strain, typically I'm topping at that third node. And that's usually about maybe like 8 inches off the soil, versus a more squattier plant. For example, I'm probably topping to the fifth node, and that's still 8 inches off the top of the soil, right? So it's like still the same amount of height off the top of the soil, just there's differences in the actual plant growth. So when I do, for the squattier ones, for example, when I top at that fourth or fifth node, that's the only topping I usually do. Because that's typically, in my experience, usually most genetics are going to stay kind of squattier. And I'll get that side branching come up, and then I'll do bending of low stress training. And then once I'm satisfied where I'm at, I'll flip to flower. Now with the longer inner node ones, right, I'm doing that topping at the third node. Oftentimes I'm doing another topping after that, because I'm growing a lot of these plants in the same grow space, and I'm trying to keep all the plants even canopy, right? And some of these plants can get out of control really quick, right? If they're stretchier, they can just, you either putting them into another grow space and then flipping to flowering on their own, or if you really only have one grow space, you have to flip that whole tent at the same time, and you don't want to just neglect the training on the plant that needs the training, the long stretchy one, and then, be stuck with a smaller plant on the other end. You want to be able to train that, at least for me, train that longer, stretchier one. So I'll do that top at like the third node, for example. Then I'll do another topping of those top branches. And sometimes I do another topping of those branches. And that allows me to kind of slow down that growth a little bit on that plant and have that other squattier plant kind of catch up, right? There's so many different ways to go about it, like I had mentioned in the beginning. But yeah, sometimes particularly on those longer, stretchier ones, I'm doing multiple toppings, and I'm not doing much defoliation because the inner nodes are longer and maybe there's a little bit less leaf structure. So it really depends on growth to how the training is getting done for me.
I can't believe you're willing to admit that on camera. This man tops his plants over and over and over again.
It's abuse.
What a shame.
I think it's
just kidding.
very valid.
I also
point
have a
to
video that says you
stagger your
shouldn't top
plant,
your
though.
pants. So top your pants. Top your plants. So I just wanted to make that. Gotta give him a hard time.
I think that it's a very valid point, though. If you're growing multiple variety of cultivars in that space, you may need to treat one a little different. It's not the when, it's the what in that case, because you're gonna have to defold the one, or, prune the one that has a ton of foliage, the one that has the squatty, super tight, no air through there. The other one you may never have to. This other one you don't have to do a whole lot of low stress training because she's low and squatty already. Other one, she's lanky, so you need to do that consistently. But then you go into the biggest thing, in my opinion, is then how long that plant's going to veg for and how long that plant's going to flower for. So like I was saying earlier with the fast flowering cultivars, if you don't have much room in that plant for like growth properly, and you could potentially get bud rot, let's say, or powdery mildew, you need to get that defoliation in veg, because flower, it's exploding, it's just going. And I wouldn't want to slow down or hinder any of my flowering time with stress of plucking and pulling on these leaves. So there's a certain time I feel like to stop certain training. If you're doing something like tucking, if it's a plant that continues to stretch into flower, you can still continue to tuck. So whether it be in a sense of low stress training or bending, or in a sense of utilizing a screen to green. Because like I've got a plant right now that's in flower, the garlic butter from HSC. And that one is just kept stretching and stretching and stretching like nonstop. And I've got the Fuel DOG, and that one was just like kind of stopped once I put it into flower. And so my canopy is a little weird. I had to get a crate to lift it up because I was like, oh shit, I thought this was going to do a little bit more even of the growth there. Like my training methods, I didn't want to do any more heavy bending or super cropping or defold, anything. I was like, shit, this is where it's at. So if you're growing multiple cultivars, when you do it, how you do it is a big factor, because you could wind up with a weird uneven canopy and potentially bud rot if you've got too thick of growth in the space without doing the proper defoliation or bending of your plants. It just really depends on the cultivar. I know that sounds like too many variables things. There's so many variables, but that's the thing we talk about so often for years now at this point, man, is there's so many variables that come into it that you got to grow a few of them out. That's why Pigeon's method, and I do oftentimes too, of when you first grow a cultivar, just kind of letting it do its thing to see the natural expression before you start taking this approach. Because some plants may like low stress training better than topping, or they may take better from it. Some do better collectively, and some may need a little bit more nurturing to get through the training methods. Just depends.
Yeah, and genetics. I mean, and some of these plants just might grow out of control, and it's harder to train than other ones. Good example I have is peanut butter breath, and I've grown that plant out many times. And we were just talking about the long stretchier strain versus the squattier strain, kind of being in the same grow space. And I'm thinking back to just last year, I had a peanut butter breath, and I tried to maintain the canopy with the other ones, but I ended up having the peanut butter breath so stretchy, long inner nodes, typical OG, and having that in a tomato cage onto one side of my tent, and then the three other plants that I was able to manage and keep the same canopy on the other side of the tent. So some things can, certainly kind of get out of control easy, so knowing your genetics would be important. And like Rob said, growing it out first might be a good idea. So you can kind of say, hey, how is this going to grow without training? How is this, grow naturally? That could help you in the future.
Yeah, the amount of work that I did for the CLtv to look so much like Pigeons is wild to me. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, I could have just left it alone and you would have started doing this anyways. But I treated it like I knew how it grew just because I watched my other plants grow. I don't know.
The thing is, too, I think it's okay that I like to talk in rule of thumb, if I can still say that in 2024, that generally speaking, when I get it to training, when I flip the lights to 12 and 12, there's a 3-week period that I can train those plants to kind of do what I want for the most part. For the first 3 weeks of flower, when the plant is utilizing some of its stored nutrients now with the additional dark time, most genetics are going to grow a little bit more. They're going to stretch a little bit more. So they're in my findings, you're still going to be hands-on. You're still going to do a little bit of training. A lot of people say no training in flower.
Yeah, hands off as soon as you flip. That's what I've heard. That's like the rule of thumb for most people.
And that's it. And I just feel that at that point, there's another rule of thumb that when you switch to 12 and 12, you can expect your plant to double in size. Right? I'm sure you guys heard that. Now, some are less, some are more. But generally speaking, people say when you switch to 12 and 12, don't have it too close to light because it's going to double in size. Well, that plays into the being able to train your plant going into flower. It shouldn't be a guessing game. You shouldn't have everything looking perfect, switch to 12 and 12, and then be surprised when it just grew uncontrollably 8 inches, right? So rule of thumbs work great. Cultivar expression is very important. However, as the grower, you have a lot of control. You have the ability to steer this plant to do as she wishes. However, after that 3 weeks, now you can't spend the time training now because she's going to focus on repairing and fixing and training, vegging, rather than working on that bud structure and those terpenes and trichromes and all those other. I'm so confused. There's so much science. So I just there's a rule of thumb. And I think it's okay to be hands-on at the beginning of flower so that you can control what's going to happen. But afterwards, she might keep stretching. That's the expression. You just don't know.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. Those weeks after the flip, and you mentioned 3 weeks, but some of these longer flowering strains, they can be 4+ weeks I mean, geez, I had a Hades throne. By Zaza Genetics. It stretched for like, I think close to 5 weeks. I was like, oh no, I wasn't planning for that. I didn't know. So going back to knowing the genetics. But after flipping to the 12-12, what I personally do is I'll still do the bending, right? Want to maintain that even canopy. These branches are starting to grow kind of a little bit out of control, I guess I could say, become uneven. So bringing them down a little bit more, the ones that are growing upward, bringing them down and maintaining that even canopy is something I strive for. And usually I'm adjusting the ties, I want to say every day, but it's usually every other day, every 2 to 3 days, I am having to adjust the ties that I use to tie down to the bottom of the grow pot. We didn't even get into talking about what to use for training as far as ties or training clips or so on and so forth. But I mostly use the ties, and I really only do that. What I also resort to as like a last resort is if I have branches in the middle of the plant that I can't bend down, but they're growing up and they're kind of dominating. At that point, I'll do a super cropping. Kind of a last resort type thing. I'll do a super cropping. I'll break the outer layer of the stem there, have that flop down, and that'll allow those outer branches that I've bent down to grow back up. Or I'll loosen up ties so that the branches will be able to kind of go back upwards, because they're not restrained downward. And now a last resort, very last resort, right? And this has happened before where I went on vacation and just happened to be during stretch. I come back, super cropping is no longer an option. The plants have stopped stretching. Super cropping is no longer an option. I have that one branch that just dominated. It's too close to the light. No matter how I place the plant in the grow space, I still have this one branch that's dominant and potentially, and getting too much light to actually herm. I've had that happen before. The one branch too close to the light and then it's just loaded with nanas in a couple days. But the very last resort would be to actually cut off that branch. And I get the question from time to time on my forum where people are like, there's this one branch that I have, and they post a picture and it's dominating. They have it bent down to the side the best they can, but still it makes everything else in the plant so awkward. It's like, you got to sacrifice that one, taking that one branch off at week 3, around day 21, taking that one branch off will take the plant a lot further than will do more good than harm. So that's just my opinion. I know every situation is different, but there has been times where I had to actually remove that dominant branch at the end of week 3 because it was just better. It was better for me to remove that one branch and bring that light down and get better light coverage on those other lower branches.
Yeah, man, I think that's a big thing too, is knowing that you may have to sacrifice some depending on the cultivar. You may have to do more vigorous training, and you may also have to do things that you may not want to do depending on where you are in your space. If you have limited height, if you have limited time that you can flower your plant out or veg your plant out, sometimes you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them, literally.
Do you guys remember when the first time you topped your plant was?
First time I grew, because I read a book.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, Jorge Cervantes.
Oh, yeah? I remember I was told by a friend to top it. I was scared. I was frightened. I was alone. It was dark. And the plant was already like
he's cutting the wires for a bomb.
I had to take my shirt off. Like people were going to die once this happened. And I just thought I was worried. And the plant was already 1.5 feet tall, and Buddy's like, yeah, just chop the top off. And of course I was like, oh, what? And I thought maybe I could clone it afterwards. So I tried to save the top. Well, you can if you're not dumb. So I couldn't figure it out. So it died. But the plant turned out to be quite amazing. It was huge. It exploded in growth. It was pretty awesome. And so it can be intimidating to do this kind of stuff to your plant. But you know what? Mistakes happen, and then they turn into entirely other training techniques, like a FIM.
I can totally picture Pigeons like going into his grow space with trimmers in one hand, his hand outward, about to touch the plant in the other one, sweating, looking like he's about to disarm a bomb, right? He's like going in there, being real delicate. It's like, bomb disarmed.
Babe, we're going to be okay. Yeah.
We'll make it. We're going
to be fine.
That's crazy. See, and I think that's the thing, is people have to experience it first, man. If you don't experience it, you won't know. You just follow things blindly and you won't necessarily see the good and the bad of stuff. I learned FIM from exactly what it's called because I was topping with my fingers because I was like, I don't want to use scissors, I want to use natural, just pinch. So I was like, no, you're FIMing. And only like 5 years ago did I even like really properly top my plants. You know what I'm saying? I'm always just pinching and pinching because I like get it down so tight. I always got long ass fingernails, but and then at one point the FIM technique I saw doing better. The guy mist, they call it. And it just, again, it depends on the cultivar. I think that you have to play around with it. You got to try things out. Having multiple clones of the same cultivar to try things out and test, like A/B split testing, is a great way to see how a cultivar reacts to the way you grow with less time instead of waiting a whole entire cycle. And then looking at your notes, you can literally look at them side by side and be like, damn, look at the difference in this one here that I low stress trained versus topping, or the one with scrogging versus sea of green. Like, it really helps you see the way to tackle it for your next run. Data is everything, man.
No, that guy missed story that I don't know if you guys knew that. I sat down with Kyle Cushman and he says that's, I'm gonna say an urban legend or whatever, a myth, or the story got screwed up in one way or another. He had mentioned that he worked at High Times and somebody submitted in a question about it and they signed their name FIM. And so that was actually where it came from, is somebody signing their name FIM, not
someone's like, it sounds like.
So yeah. I don't know. That's allegedly. That's what Kyle Cushman told me. So I thought it was just so funny because all these years and people just pass on the same story over and over and over again, that it was some guy who tried to top his plant and missed, and he said missed, and then the branch, instead of just going in 2 like a top would, it went 3 or 4 or whatever. But it was actually some guy who signed his name FIM.
It's just like one day people are going to look at FTS as free the sausage or something. And it depends on where you are.
Consider it free, boss.
Let it be free, brother.
Well, great conversation, gentlemen. I think that was fantastic. I think we kind of summed that up from beginning to end. If there's any questions in regards to how you train your plants, or think we missed something, we want to hear from you. Let us know in the comment section down below. Yeah, if you're listening to this, hop over to YouTube, drop it there, or check out our Patreon. And you can go to patreon.com/fromthestash. We got an area you can communicate in there, or our Discord as well. There's links to that, I believe, below on YouTube.
We definitely want to know in the comment section below, how do you train your plants? Let us know. I'd like to read through that.
And when do you trade your plants?
Yeah.
But with that being said, it's your boy Rob from
in the bathroom when I'm taking a
without a phone, like a real man.
Without a phone, I'm in there with my plants. That's it, guys. We're out of here. On that note,
peace.
Rob from CLtv and this show, Pigeons 420, Mr. Grow It. We'll see you guys next time. Peace. Just want to give a big shout out to all the patrons who support this channel. Without you guys, it would be so much harder to produce. You literally help us make this happen. If you want to be able to continue to help From the Stash grow, go to patreon.com/fromthestash and join.